Hi, and welcome to VIBEZ Daily. This is a daily devotional curated by VIBEZ Church to help you practice the way of Jesus and be all that God has called you to be. You have joined us for our year-long series titled Devoted. Acts 2:42 tells us that the followers of Jesus were devoted to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to breaking of bread, and to prayer. This podcast was created to provide context and commentary for what you read each day. Just before our friends begin discussing today's reading, we want to invite you not only for fellowship, but for prayer as well. We have created the VIBE Daily Chat Group to offer you fellowship and a community where you can state your observations, ask questions about the reading or the podcast. You can join us by downloading the VIBEZ Church app in your favorite app store. Click Join the Conversation and join us today. And finally, we hope that you can join us for prayer. Prayer happens Monday through Friday, and more information on that can be found on the VIBEZ Church app under prayer. Now, let's begin our conversation on today's reading.
All right, welcome to day 24 of the VIBEZ Daily podcast and our Devoted series. So glad to have you back here as we continue to journey through Exodus. And just before we jump in, just another quick reminder, you'll have information about it as soon as we finish this conversation today. But please check out our merch store. I'm rocking particularly the Devoted collection, and there are some other options there. Definitely check it out and show your support through a purchase there. But let's just jump in. We left off in the middle of a couple plagues that Moses and God were, I don't even know the word I want to use, but inflicting, maybe that's a good word, upon Egypt. And so we get here to the fifth plague, kind of really halfway here at chapter 9. So yeah, any thoughts? We get a couple different plagues here in chapter 9 specifically. Any thoughts from what we see here? Anything that stands out to you guys about these plagues?
Yeah, the plague of the livestock, again, you see like God making that distinction between the Israelites and the Egyptians, but like we know that livestock is like very valuable.
Yeah.
That's how they, make their money a lot of times. That's their source of just food, and even like a source of like showing how wealthy like someone is. And so for that to be the thing that was struck, God was like, I'm really not playing with y'all. Now I'm about to go to the things that really matter to you. And hitting them where it hurts.
Yeah, I think that was exactly what I was going for when I was reading this, because he hit the livestock, which was wealth, the crops with the hail, which was wealth, and then also afflicted their health, their bodies with the boil. And, something has reminded me of the book of Job, when like Satan came, and the things that he came to afflict Job was he took away his wealth and all his crops and provision. He took away his health and gave him boils and scabs and stuff. And he took away his family, like his sons and daughters. And so I think it's like very similar in that. It was just like, okay, I'm going to hit you where it hurts, like the trifecta here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Come on. That's a good parallel, and like being able to tie that in with Job.
Yeah.
For me, I think it's even like each plague, they're all bad, but it's like getting worse and worse. Like it's leading up to the death of of Pharaoh's son. You know what I mean? Like, like the blood was just like, first of all, again, they're all bad, but it's like, this is a little test to let y'all know. This is my finger, right? And now he's like, all right, I'm about to get this livestock. I'm about to start sending hell. Like, yeah, it's just, I'm seeing the intensity just growing and growing each plague.
Yeah. And then it even says it like in verses like 13 leading up to 15, where God is telling them like, okay, I'm still wanting you to let my people go so they could worship me. But he said, this time I will send the full force of my plagues against you and against your officials and your people, so you may know that there is no one like me in all the earth. So still we see God wanting to get glorified through this, and let them know that there's no other God outside of me. Like, I'm the one and only true God. But you do see God saying like, hey, I'm giving you the full force now. Like, it is getting worse, from this point forward. And then he continued to keep his word in that.
Yeah. And I love that you pointed it out, because even right below that in verse 16, I love that God, once again, is like for this purpose, I have raised you up. And sometimes I was like, okay, let's not forget what our purpose was. It wasn't to exalt Moses. It wasn't for the Israelites' sake. Really, it was for the purpose to show my power so that my name may be proclaimed in all the earth.
Yeah.
And what I love about that is once the Israelites do get out into the wilderness and start going to the promised land, you start hearing these stories where they're like, we've heard that the God has saved you guys and parted the Red Sea, and we've heard of the God who, and so that's why there's like fear that is trembling in these surrounding nations, because this is actually happening, like that God's name is actually being spread and proclaimed. And like you said, now we are almost 4,000 years later or so, that like we're sitting here still talking about it.
Yeah, for sure. And then you had even pointed this out. I think that was you, Victoria, that pointed out in the previous episodes of like how God could have like literally wiped the people out completely. And he literally says it here, like, I could have wiped out all of the earth, but like I didn't. And my verse even says, when it does talk about how like I've raised you up, in the commentary, it also says raise you up means I've spared you. Like, so again, there's that mercy that we're seeing, that like God didn't have to like allow for these people to live, or even the Israelites and the Egyptians to be able to live through this, but yet he allowed it.
Yeah.
I'm also noticing verse 12, the language of God hardening Pharaoh's heart for the first time. If I'm not mistaken, in my translation, like, it's always any plague that has passed by, it would just say that Pharaoh's heart was stubborn or hardened. And now this is what I'm noticing for the first time. It's like God is now doing that to his heart. And I also see, like, I mean, we kind of talked about the miracles and the signs that was performed, but seeing God encourage Moses to pull out, like, raise his hands and stuff like that as a way of practice to like the Red Sea. Just using his faith in that way.
Yeah. I know we've kind of been taking these plagues together, which is fun because it's kind of how the story goes. But I love that kind of starting at the seventh plague with the hail specifically, that, like, you guys pointed out that there was this distinction in kind of the plagues before, where God kind of separated and said, okay, I'm going to make it clear that my hand is on Israel, right? And, what will happen to Egypt won't happen to Israel. But starting with hail, there's now this invitation for Israel to choose sides, right? And to kind of like choose whether they will obey, right? Which ultimately we'll see played out in the 10th plague here in a second as well. But there's this invitation where it's like, all right, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. Now you have to make a choice of whether you believe me or not, because it says, tomorrow at this time, this is verse 18, I will rain down the worst hail has ever occurred in Egypt from the day it was founded to now. Therefore, give orders to bring your livestock and all that you have in the field into shelters. And so, like, there's this, like, now you have to actually do something to avoid what it is that's coming. And I'm inviting you to actually show your faith and your allegiance and your belief in me through the action of doing this. I'm no longer just going to just spare you for the sake of you're in Israel, or an Israelite. But, like, I'm going to now, you have to actually make a decision to choose me in order to receive that gift. And again, we see that again with in chapter 10 with chapter 10, but with the 10th plague, with the death of the firstborn and the Passover, and even in just in our personal relationship with Christ, right? That, like, we still have to make that decision and that choice to accept that.
Yeah, I didn't see it's also like an invitation for the Egyptians. Yeah. Because in verse 20, it's like, whoever feared the word of the Lord among the servants of Pharaoh, my other version says, among Pharaoh's officials, like, they hurried their slaves and their livestock into the houses. And so it's like, I'm even giving, like, you can see that there's even Egyptians now who are reverencing God.
Yeah.
And and then he said there were some who not, because it says, but whoever didn't pay attention to the word of the Lord left his slaves and livestock in the field. And so it was like this distinction of, like, okay, like, now Egypt, you've seen my hand. Do you fear me? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Which we already know they do at this point. I mean, at least his magicians and stuff, because they've tried to warn him multiple times, and Pharaoh hasn't like listened. Yeah. And I think it even goes back to when when Moses was drawn out the water, right? And that the daughter of that Pharaoh didn't necessarily agree with her father. And I think both of those like stories just really speak to, I mean, we all have a decision to make ourselves and an opportunity to do something different, right? And I think it takes away the excuse of like, well, I was brought up in this home, or you know, these generational curses, or whatever it is that came before me, but says like, I have the ability to break that and to do something different, because God has invited all of us to make the same decision. Yeah. And to your point, like, even though they were Egyptian, they had an out. They had an option to do something different if they wanted to. Yeah.
I thought it was interesting seeing Pharaoh's language when he is kind of using that same tactic of like, all right, let me go back to Aaron and Moses so they can go to pray to their God for me. Like this time he says, this time I have sinned. He said to them, the Lord is in the right and I and my people are in the wrong. And so we see this, like, it seemed like he was getting soft, like his heart was getting softened. He's like, wait a minute, I done sinned against the Lord. Like, you kind of see a little bit of this fear and reverence, but then he goes back to just kind of doing what he was doing before. And it goes back to that again, like, we can relate to this, like sinning and confessing these things to God and praying about it, but then going back to our ways. But we do know that the Lord continued to harden his heart for a reason.
Lord, if you get me out this situation, I promise I won't do it again.
And I love that you mentioned that too, because in verse 30, Moses calls them out. And he's like,
that's cool enough.
As for you and your servants, I know that you don't yet fear the Lord God. Like, you're saying this stuff, but you say, once again, like we said in yesterday's conversation, like you're saying this stuff to get this to stop. And Moses says, all right, when I leave, it's going to stop because this is what we deemed for it to do. Yeah. But we still know your heart posture.
Exactly. They had to look at the fruit of what they've been able to see thus far. And he's like, yeah, nah. You're going to go back. And then we do see Pharaoh. He sinned again.
As soon as he left.
Yeah.
As soon as he saw the hell stop, he was like, let me go ahead.
Yeah.
Keep sinning.
Yeah, which, I mean, obviously that takes us into chapter 10 and the next plague. So the locusts come, and I think it's interesting that if you read verse 32 of chapter 9, that it highlights that there were certain crops that they were not destroyed because they had not budded yet, right? Yeah. So it's like, well, let me come back with these locusts here.
Take it out.
The next plague, and like come get that stuff that was left over, right? So so we get the locust in chapter 10, and then eventually darkness as well. Anything in these two plagues you guys thought were interesting?
Yes, I love the I'm skipping over the locust just to talk about the darkness because of that foreshadowing of like what happened, when Jesus died on the cross, and there was a period of darkness that went over the earth. And so I was able to kind of see that same foreshadowing happening, where it's like, okay, before then I hadn't heard about this whole darkness coming onto the earth. But we do get to see that again later when Jesus dies on the cross.
Yeah.
I love this exchange between Pharaoh and Moses after, right before he sends the locust. And once again, Pharaoh's trying to negotiate or like have some type of power in this. And like before, he was asking like, "Oh, don't go too far." In the chapters before, now he's asking in verse 8 of chapter 10. Like, so who's supposed to go with you? Like, who?
Right.
So who all is supposed to go? And like, Moses is like everybody, like the young, the old, like everyone. And he's just like, no, I'm not letting the little ones go, which is crazy because he started killing, like his father was killing off the little ones.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's so funny that like, and all of a sudden, like he's enraged again because it's like once again he's trying to gain some type of control.
For sure.
And Moses isn't budging.
Yeah. Good.
I love the verse 16, this fake coming to Jesus moment. all because of what's happening, right? I have sinned against the Lord your God, and against you he confessed, forgive my sins just this once, and plead with your God, and take away this death from me. It's like, he's still negotiating.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
With God now. Like, just this once, like, please let me have this moment so I can have my flock back. That's really what he wanted. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Right. But what's interesting, because I know that you guys were mentioning like this God versus God situation. Now we're seeing that the little G, God, is submitting to the big G, because he's like, now I'm the one begging to you to like, please stop. Like, save my land, save my people, like, stop doing what you're doing. And so you do see, again, just like this ultimate power and authority that like the one and only true living God has. And these other false gods, like, there's literally no power. Like, they literally have to bow and submit to God themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And even in verse 24, he goes on with another plea, like his last plea was like, okay, let your little ones go, but the flocks and the herds have to stay. And it's like,
fam, you're not understanding. You're not getting it.
At this point, they kind of out of flocks and herds themselves.
Right,
So they need somebody else's. But yeah. I also think it's just an interesting parallel when I just kind of bookend it with like, or look at the Israelites stay in Egypt and just kind of bookend it with like the famine that started it and like where they are today now, right? Like that. When they first came, I mean, there was a famine on the land like they had never seen before.
Yeah.
So you just think like there is no food, and you know the animals are probably suffering and all this stuff is happening. And when they leave, they're almost leaving it the way they found it, right? Because by the time they leave, like there's no, again, the crops that was, anything that was left, the locusts didn't eat up at this point, right? And we already know that livestock are dying and there's all this stuff that's happening. And so it's like, literally they came into a famine and are leaving Egypt like desolate and devastated. That's the word that my my translation uses in verse 7, where Moses says, don't you realize yet that Egypt is devastated? Like, I mean, they're literally leaving it devastated on the way out. And so I just think it's an interesting, again, just bookend with the way that they came into Egypt and the way that they're leaving, like in so many different ways.
That's good.
I looked over and saw this water bottle.
I was waiting for you to finish. I was like, I gotta let him finish.
Yeah, but it's like they were blessed because of Israel being there.
Exactly.
Right? Like all these blessings and all this that you, because the Lord has been here with his people.
That's The reason why you have success, Egypt, is because of God.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Man, that's good.
Yeah. That was.
Yeah, but I also just want to point out before we get to 11, I don't know that we understand the impact of darkness quite the same way. Just because, like, I mean, we just live in a lit world at this point, right? Excuse me. Electricity has changed so much for what we understand, and like just darkness, like just absolute darkness, man. It's just, I can't even imagine what that world looks like and what that had to be like. But I think that there's a reason that's almost, you know, the penultimate plague here. Like, there's a reason that, as you talk about, if it's building up, there's a reason that is like just before death is just darkness, and the weight of that. And I think it's hard for us to really understand the significance of that, but it's big.
Yeah.
I feel like I just gotta let Colin jump in. He's over here.
I was about to say.
All right.
He sound good. I was gonna say, like, my in verse 21, mine's also emphasized. It says darkness that can be felt.
Yeah.
Like, man, I'm like, now that is weighty. Like, not only can you see it, but you can feel it. And I think
so thick that you can feel it.
Yeah, like I think even alluding to like spiritually, like when you can feel like a spiritual darkness, like, man, like it really shows like this lack of presence of God, like in those spaces and places. And so, yeah. I think it was good, like pointing that out, and then also knowing that like the darkness covered all of Egypt for 3 days. I think there's something significant about that too.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Like the 3 days. And again, like I'm looking at Jesus in this text, but very profound.
Come on, Pastor.
No, I mean I'm just I'm stuck on those 3 days right now.
Yeah.
Just like the darkness that lasted for those 3 days, and just obviously, you said the parallel with Jesus in the tomb for those 3 days, and just like the darkness over the land at that time in which he separated. I mean, it's just,
and they felt it.
And they felt
the
it.
disciples
That
felt
separation.
it. The followers felt that.
Yeah.
Yes.
oh man, no, it's so good.
And we know that, like, in Genesis, God said, like, there was a reason why he separated the light from the dark. Like, he saw that something was up with it. Like, something is not good
Yeah.
And when he
about
saw
this
the
darkness.
light, it was good. I'm out.
Yep. And again, he's saying, like, my people, the Israelites, are good, because we even see in a text where it said, yet all the Israelites had light in the places where they lived.
Yeah.
So,
And I think it's so crazy that it was so dark that they couldn't see one another.
yeah.
And it says that they remained in their place for 3 days. Like, they couldn't even really, like, go anywhere.
They fasting.
Or do anything. Like, they're just stuck. And I think sometimes, like you said, when we're in these dark places, like, we just stuck. Like, we can't go anywhere without Jesus, without the light. Like, we immobile. We just sitting here.
And imagine your mind playing tricks on you. Like, have you ever been in a dark space and place and you just felt like you just saw stuff?
Yes.
Or like, your eyes just like start doing things and everything. And it's like, I can only imagine what that was for them to endure that for 3 days. And like, that's enough for them to imagine the unimaginable. But it's also a moment for them to really cry out and seek God, the true God.
The true God.
Yeah.
This shit.
And for real this time, we ain't playing.
Like, because it's like, wait, what happened to the sun, right?
Yeah.
Like, for these people, it's like, this gotta be God. Like, if the sun ain't even coming out, and like, that is their source of light, right? Like, wow.
Yeah.
And,
I think
I was gonna say, sorry. No, I was about to say, and I was gonna say, like, kind of going back to like when Moses was like, okay, what name do you want me to give these people? Like, I can imagine them having like a god of thunder and a god of this and a god of that, and like, God is showing himself like, no, I'm everything. I'm all this. Like, I created this.
Yeah.
I reign over this. I rule over this. Like, all of this is in my hand, and I have full ability and control over all of this.
That's deep.
Through these plagues, I don't care if you are a believer or not, living in that time,
For sure.
you had to acknowledge that Yahweh was the only one.
For sure.
Yeah.
Like,
COVID was enough for me to to be like, hold on.
you know, and that's what he said. But that's what he said in his promise, in his plan to Moses, is like, by the end of this whole situation, all of Egypt gonna know I'm the one.
Yes.
Yeah. That's so good, man. And you said, I just think about the significance of some of these plagues. Like you said, some of the earlier ones, they seem like, oh yeah, okay, a magician can pull this off. But like, when you start getting to things like hail, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, he's controlling the weather. Like, think about the way that they talked about Jesus when he stopped the storm. They're like, who is this that can speak to the storm, right? Like, who is that?
Come on.
That God is like, I mean, that hail is coming, or darkness. I mean, these are things that it's like, yeah, this is complete evidence of just God and his power and his control, his sovereignty, his just who he is. So it's man, it's hard to come away reading this and again just like not realizing the depth and the width and the just the height of God's power. And again, just to know that, I mean, that's the God we serve, right? That's incredible. But so go from there to the 10th and final plague, which is the death of the firstborn son. And so we'll kind of take 11 and 12 here together, because there's obviously the first announcement of what this plague will be, the opportunity for what Israel, again, kind of like the hail situation, right? There's an invitation for Israel to avoid what's going to happen here, and instructions for what that will be, and then ultimately what actually happens, how the death happens. So let's take 11 and 12, kind of the first part of 12 essentially, before we get to the Exodus specifically. But anything that you guys thought was interesting about this last plague?
Yeah, I felt like it was God's judgment for what the previous Pharaoh had did to the Israelites and their firstborn. Like the fact that he decided that he tried through the midwives to go ahead and kill them off, but couldn't. And then he went ahead and put them in the Nile River, and ultimately for them to die. But I feel like the reason why God was so stuck on that firstborn, because one, he knows the significance of passing down, these lineages and like all these different things. But also it's like, no, you came after my people and their firstborn, and now look what I'm going to do to you and yours. So I felt like there was definitely some kind of like significance between that.
Yeah, it's good.
Sure.
I love that. Like you kind of mentioned, the invitation, like regardless of Israel being the chosen people, like God still being open enough to everybody to try this thing out, right? And you just see early on that he's not a segregated God, like, I'm just for these people. He's using the Israelites as a vehicle to help the world, see him. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that now at this point, looking back, Moses was so nervous that the Israelites weren't going to listen to him. Like, nobody was going to follow him. Like, Lord, why are you sending me here? But then here we go in verse 3 of chapter 11. Is that what you're going to? Yeah, and my version says, moreover, the people had favor in the sight of the Egyptians, but moreover, the man Moses was very great in the land of Egypt, in the sight of Pharaoh's servants, and in the sight of the people. Yeah. And I think it's just like, the Lord has done what he said he was going to do. Like, he exalted Moses for the sake of like bringing him glory, because then down in verse 8, he was like, the people, the servants will come and bow down to me, saying, please give you and all the people like out. And so like, I love it, because it's like, like to Pharaoh, Moses is that guy, like, or at least to the Pharaoh's servants at this point, right? He, after the last plague, he becomes that guy to Pharaoh too. But like, he is, and he has been exalted. What were you gonna say though?
No, I mean, I love that, because I think that, it's interesting. Pharaoh set out when this started to prove that, like, I mean, he was God, right? He's in control. Like, again, go back to the question that you pointed out, right? Who is this Lord, and why should I listen to him, right? Like, he set out to prove I am who I am, right? And he had the allegiance of his people in so many ways. And I just think it's so interesting that when he set out to oppose God and decide to go against God, like, not only did he lose God to God, like, he lost the people, right? Like, and I think that, for us, it's just this, to me, it's just encouragement, man. Like, if you just do what God has said do, like, just go after what it is that he has for you, that, like, even the people that, were against you, right? And you felt like opposed you, and maybe it was a lot of people that, like, even those people will come to eventually recognize and acknowledge, like, what God is doing. And I think that that's what's so crazy about it. Like I said, Pharaoh ends up like on an island by the time this is all said and done. I mean, he's Pharaoh, so he can still make people do what he wants them to do. But people are looking at him, like you said, they're all looking at Moses like, well, hey, he's the guy that actually stops this stuff when it happens. So, he seems to have, more control here than even Pharaoh does. So, I just thought it was just, again, it's very insightful that he gets this favor and this allegiance from the people of Egypt.
Yeah. And I was going to say, my verse 3 says that the Lord made the Egyptians favorably disposed to the Israelites, and to the point where it's like, y'all not just leaving with what y'all had and came with, like, y'all gonna leave with more. Y'all taking silver, y'all taking gold, and these different things from the Egyptians. And it just shows the Lord's favor over them.
And the fulfillment of what he already told them was going to happen, right? He's like, you guys are going to plunder them on the way out.
Plunder, yes.
Yeah, tell Abram that, which is crazy. How long ago that was. But, so he goes before Pharaoh. Pharaoh's not obviously very happy about what Moses says is going to happen, and Moses is not very happy about Pharaoh's response. Like, I love it that Moses like storms out angry, but then he go to give this instructions to for the Passover, and like this is kind of what is going to come. So what did you guys find was interesting in chapter 12 here? These instructions for the Passover.
The specific instruction to take a lamb, and how it talks about even like God saying, "I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, that He will be passing over." And like, I think that's just so like Jesus, like the sacrificial lamb whose blood was the thing that redeemed us and allowed for us to have salvation. And so seeing that depiction in this, and how, again, kind of like how you said earlier, like God giving the Israelites this invitation of like, I want you to partner with me. This is what I want you to actually do. Like, because I can just easily just pass over you guys' places. Like, I already know you. You're my people. I've made you guys, made a distinction between you guys. But He's given them the upper hand of like, no, are you actually going to do what I tell you to do?
Yeah.
As crazy as it may sound, like, are you willing to do that? So yeah.
And it also says with no defects. You know what I mean? Like, pick the best sheep, best goat that you can find. And that even is imagery for Jesus as well, being the best sheep for us.
I love, like you said, that he's so specific.
Yeah.
And he starts it now, right? Because once we get into the wilderness, he starts giving all these rules and regulations for the temple, the tabernacle, and all that stuff. Like, he's so specific, and I love that he is who he is, in that he's consistent in how he wants his people to follow him. Yeah, it's not, like you said, willy nilly or haphazardly. But then I think it was when I was reading my study Bible. Come on, again, that they had like a cross reference, that when I was reading in Ephesians 6 about the armor of God, and the parallel that it cross-referenced back to Exodus. And I was like, well, what does Exodus have to do with it? And looking at this chapter 12, verse 11, in this manner that they should eat it. And it has some of the same armor or same pieces as the armor of God. Is with your belt fastened, with your sandals on your feet, with your staff in your hand, the staff being somewhat like the shield, right? And like, it's just one of these things of like, gear up for this battle, gear up for this journey, like gear up for what I have for you next. And starting that. And you see this, I mean, throughout scripture, I think I always get these two prophets mixed up. It's either in Isaiah or Ezekiel, y'all. I promise it's there. One of them mentions some of these pieces too, in reference to Jesus and what he was going to come wearing. And so I love it, because we keep on mentioning Jesus and some of the foreshadowing. The fact that it shows up here, it shows up in the prophets, and then eventually shows up with Paul speaking in Ephesians. It's just like consistent.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there is a ministry out there, and for the life of me, I can't recall it off the top of my head right now. But they do a presentation they call Messiah and the Passover, which is a very interesting thing, where they take this Passover meal and how it's observed and point out how elements in the Passover all point to the Messiah. They point to Jesus. And so it is interesting. Like you said, you talk about the lamb, you talk about some other things, but it's even things that they like say and do in their dinner to this day, that like, as they practice it, whether it's a Messianic Jew or not, that like the Passover as it's practiced points so much to the Messiah. And so I love that it's done before. Like, almost every other symbol that we have encountered has been established after God did whatever it was he said he was going to do, right? This is one of the first times where he gives instructions for like, this is how you're going to celebrate. I'm going to do what I said I'm going to do, right? Like, don't worry about that. I'm going to follow through. This is going to happen. But let me go ahead and tell you now how you're going to remember this for generations. Let me go ahead and establish that. And I thought it was so interesting he gives these instructions even beforehand. And then one of the things I just love is I love that, God is inclusive. Like, you talk about all the different details that he's always detailed. But I mean, I don't know. To me, it was significant that in verse 4, it's like if a household's too small for a whole animal, like that person, the neighbor nearest his house, like he's over here trying to just include everybody. Like, look, man, you're gonna find a way to participate, and I've given you a way. You know, I'm gonna make a way for you. Don't try to make excuses of I can't afford this, I can't do that.
Right.
Use what you got, and I'm gonna make a way for you as well.
For sure.
Yeah. Any other thoughts from these instructions?
I do have probably more so a question, because verse 17 talks about celebrating the festival of the unleavened bread. Was this something that was a festival that was already out there, that existed, that they had practiced before, or is this the first establishment of that? I'm not sure if anyone knows.
Yeah, I'll be honest and say this is not something I can factually say, but my understanding or belief is that the Passover is a part of the festival of unleavened bread.
Yes,
that,
you're right.
Yeah, that it's this is the establishment of that festival, and then Passover is the Passover meal, that kind of thing, is just a part of that festival.
Okay.
Yeah,
because I remember doing like research and reading about that before, but I couldn't remember. But I think what you were saying is what I can remember.
Yeah.
I thought the same thing, mostly because when they actually end up leaving, they were saying that their bread, they didn't have time to even like use the leaven to like rise their bread,
right?
And so that they left with unleavened bread. So that's probably the first establishment of that, for the purpose of remembering you guys aren't using leaven in your bread, because when you left out of Egypt, you didn't even have time to use the leaven in your bread to get it to rise. Like y'all had to leave in such a haste that like you left with this flat bread. You couldn't even prepare to go to the wilderness. And so that was just like the reminder of like no leaven, because when you ended up leaving, that's what it was. No leaven.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So all those instructions happen. Verse 28 tells us the Israelites went and did this, just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. And then God keeps his word. Verse 29 says this: now at midnight, the Lord struck every firstborn male in the land of Egypt. Anything about the Exodus here, as it kind of, he follows through with what he said he would do. Anything that jumped out to you here kind of into 12?
Yes. How much the Israelites had grown in numbers. It says in verse 37, there were about 600,000 men on foot, besides the women and children. So it's not even including women and children. This was a really, really big generation. Like, I guess no wonder like Pharaoh was just like, oh my goodness, it's too many of them. But like, I'm like, that had to been all of Egypt. 600,000.
Yeah.
And the fact that we see God give these instructions to all of them. Like, it wasn't like he was just like, all right, I'm gonna just 20% of you, 30% of you. Like, God gave the instructions to all of them, and he was expecting all of them to keep up with it.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of people. That's literally a lot of people for, and a lot of, like, there's just so much that can happen. Out of the 600,000, one of them could be like, yeah, I'm about to go serve another God.
Right.
Yeah.
But the fact that they all had to stand firm and strong prior to leaving, and like believing God to rescue them.
I find it funny because a couple chapters ago, like when Moses comes up to Pharaoh and says, just let my people go, like he gives the slave owners, or if not slave owners, but like the people who are controlling the Israelites, to like push them even harder. And with that push, they actually ended up being more fruitful. Like they ended up multiplying even more.
Yeah.
And that's just like cool to see, like even in a season of trying or trial or test or whatever the case may be, like fruit can come.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's good.
You can multiply.
Yeah. I love that you pointed out how many people, because like you said, when we're talking about, or when we're reading in Exodus 1. It was just like, and they were multiplying. It's kind of like, we don't have a number.
Yeah.
We're like, what was this multiplication? Like, how
Yes.
many? And now here we see it. It's kind of like, okay, well, this is probably why that Pharaoh was nervous, because this is an army. Like 600 is a good healthy army. Like 630,000 men, something like that. I don't know. I'm making up numbers.
Over 600,000.
Yeah.
I'm making them numbers now. But
about
it
600,000.
is. But then what I thought was really interesting was that next verse 30. Oh, I can't see. What the hell is it? Verse 38. I thought it was the 36. It says a mixed multitude also went up with them, which meant to me like there was others who was like, I'm coming with y'all.
Yeah.
Like, y'all not gonna
Listen.
leave me behind this desolate land.
Yeah.
I'm coming with the Lord y'all serve.
Yeah, for sure. And to
love
see,
that.
and to see. So again, like, I'm assuming the ones that we're hearing feared the Lord, they was like, we about to go with y'all. Like, I fear God, and if this is what has happened thus far, I'm not trying to stick around to see what else can happen from it. And I'm thank God that their lives were spared through that. But verse 41 talks about the amount of years that went by, and it said 430 years. Like, that was the length of time the Israelites lived in Egypt, was about 430 years. And I'm like, man, that's a long time. That is a long time. And we do see like a lot of generations have passed since then, where, you know, Joseph and them gone, like his brothers and all them, like 430 years. And I don't even know out of that how much of that was them enduring the slavery portion of it. It's a long time.
Yeah.
How old is the United States?
I mean, 16. Well, depends on. Are you talking about when like slavery started, when Columbus got here, or when the Declaration of Independence was signed? 'Cause
Probably
those are all-
Declaration.
Those are all.
Yeah.
So that's 1776,
Never mind. Just forget
so,
that whole entire question.
Yeah, I mean it's less though. It's still younger.
Yeah.
Like however you look at it, no matter which
Dang.
way you go, if you go 16, 19, it doesn't matter what year you use. We're younger. The United States of America is younger than the time the Israelites were in Egypt.
Wow. Man,
Talk about setting your ways,
Yeah.
right? And like familiar.
Yeah.
Like,
For sure.
it's like, let's get up, and for us, let's get up and go to motherland. Like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah, right? Yeah.
this is home.
Yeah.
Like if we had our own Moses that came back, it was like, all right, we all out of here. I'd be like, hold up. Like,
Listen, I like my targets and stuff. Like, I like
The
Drive Up.
Amazon being able to
Drive Up.
just
Right.
get dropped
Like
off.
Amazon Prime, I do.
Yeah,
that's real.
that is real. But I guess to that level of comfort, that's probably why later on in the text that we'll get to in the next day, that like we'll see them grumbling and talking about like, man, I was good where I was. At least I was eating good, or you know, whatever.
Yeah, definitely want to talk about that tomorrow. I will say, to your point though, Victoria, and this is, you know, something that I want to say Colin probably brought up like the first week we talked about it, but it goes back to that idea that like persecution often will like push us to where God wants us to be, right? Because you're right. If they weren't enslaved, they probably don't cry out to God, right? They were living fine, right? If they weren't enslaved and pushed and all of that, they probably would not have made that move and have been willing to listen to Moses. Like, they really only listened to Moses because it got hard.
Yes.
Because Moses was the only one that was actually bringing relief at some point, right? And so, I think it does just show another example of how God will use that persecution to actually push us to that place that he wants us to be.
That's so good.
Yeah.
Man, that's real.
Shout out to Moses. Stepping up.
Yeah, this part.
Yeah.
Well, the story's not done. We still have plenty to go here. Exodus is a total of 40 chapters, and we're only through 12. So we have 4 more tomorrow. We'll pick up at 13 and continue our conversation. Again, stick around for some instructions here in a moment. But other than that, we will see you guys tomorrow.
Thank you for joining us for the VIBEZ Daily Podcast. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, or download our favorite, the VIBEZ Church app. Visit vibes.church/devoted for additional episodes, notes, details, and the latest merch. Join us next time as we continue our journey